afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast, State of the Balance for the year 2018, January. Ooh, yes, the first one. What has happened since the balance patch of December? Well, in some ways, some things have happened. In other ways, not so much actually happen. I mean, again, in that regard, I wouldn't say the patch managed to achieve many of its actual goals, but, you know, it achieved something, so what did it achieve? I mean, looking at the search strategies have actually changed a bit there. It's less just, you know, strange M4C Sherman spam, which is what, you know, part's supposed to do there. Conscripts also become a lot more, you know, well, overall played. Like, most players will now go for heavy conscript strategies. Still some going for penal trooper strategies, but overall there's now conscript strategies, conscript support over maxims, mortars, and still some penal trooper builds. Doctrinally, there's also been a widening what they can go for. Armored Assault, or Advanced Warfare is not the common one, but Armored Assault is scout mode to happen as well. And we've seen some go for Shock Rifle. I mean, in that regard, there's also been a bit more spread, though they do tend to think to focus somewhat on the doctrines. You know, they do offer some just more elite troops they can push ahead with, and just a big tank still in the end to call in with. Like, Lend-Lease, there's still a pretty good doctrine, but it's just sort of fallen off since I've actually had to take up for it, and apparently that's not something a lot of people are keen on, but it's still pretty good. It is still pretty good, which I should hopefully have a replay going up in the near future displaying why so. But like overall, there's been some spread out there, some more variety in strategy and tactics from the Russians. They're still, you know, get a bunch of infantry, hit the enemy hard, push ahead. I mean, usually again you just see, you know, a lot of conscripts, maybe some Molotovs if they're up against, you know, Wehrmacht, in which case Molotovs are a pretty good choice early on. And, you know, they'll either take for maximum mortars, maybe some go for sniper supported by guardsmen, as those are pretty good as well. And then they'll sort of maybe either try and push it straight for medium armor, or they might go for T-70 depending on the amount of pressure the opponent is putting on them. So there's some variety there in tactics and strategy, some options there, and some things you have to sort of keep in mind when you're playing against them. But overall, there's a lot of them just, you know, like to rush out a T-34s from the 6 because they get out fast, which is so it's are quite capable of doing. They can make things quite uncomfortable for the opposing side. So that's sort of how things are looking there. Moving on to the Americans, well, there's actually been less, well, not some, I mean, there's been a bit more split up there now. There's sort of a recon support out and change as it is. It's sort of become more accepted for more American players to go for lieutenant. I mean, sort of by the end of December, more people just going for caps. Lieutenant was falling off again, but now with recon support and the ground, there's been a larger swing back towards the lieutenant and, you know, lieutenant play. But overall, still largely just go for a bunch of riflemen, hit the opponent hard, go for tanks, hit harder. I mean, they'll still, you know, try and pull for an early advantage using the initial superiority of the riflemen, usually upgrading with the BARs, and then, you know, maybe mix in some infantry, which goes with paratroopers. Rangers don't see so much usage, so it's either paratroopers from paratrooper doctrine or recon support, and then, you know, maybe pull in some light vehicles, you know, that way sort of try to build an advantage and then sort of further go ahead. But like overall, sort of late game, there's not really a sort of lot that's changed for the Americans players there. I mean, there's more Jackson's option, they're using it a lot more aggressively since it got a lot better, and of course a lot harder to deal with for the Germans. But in many other ways, there's not really been sort of a seismic shift in sort of how they play. I mean, not compared to like the Soviets, just sort of more opened up strategically. The Americans didn't. I mean, again, there's more recon support, but they still tend to be, you know, like either they'll then go for recon support, then maybe go for heavy cavalry. But this, I mean, mechanized in the end hasn't really sort of taken off as of yet, so there's not really much that's changing, in part because there isn't really a need for it, and there still aren't, for in most cases, using their abilities as part, most of them still being pretty good. So in that regard, American metagame hasn't particularly changed. Again, recon support is the new sort of hot thing, but that's always been the American thing. That'll be in a one doctrine that's amazing, they'll always keep using it, and the rest sort of maybe get used here and there by sort of the more better players. But that's about it. So that's sort of how that one goes. I mean, against the Americans, you just basically got to try and, you know, hold out, stall them, bleed them, try to aim for some early wipes, since that's usually tends to be sort of one of the best spots for getting in, and sort of prepare for what hits next, especially with the lieutenant. You know, expect if they have recon support, that one, in which case you want to prepare up there. I mean, if you have a doctrine that goes for Pumas, you know, mobile defense, if the Wehrmacht just can't go for Pumas, that's not a half bad choice. It tends to be one of the better counters to the Greyhound at the moment, and certainly has resulted in a lot of players just in case moving in for those. As for the Brits, well, even less has changed there. I mean, in most cases they'll still just go for a bunch of infantry. In fact, they'll go for even more now, bolster them early, pressure really hard, and then just sort of stall. Usually they'll actually just stall for a Crocodile, because that one's really hard to kill and can do amazing damage, plus it hard counters anti-tank guns as well. and you can take on most medium armors. So if you're just again pressuring with a heavy infantry section build, they become very overbearing and almost really tiresome to deal with, because again they just sort of keep swarming, keep pushing you, and they'll just go for their big, really difficult deal with the tank, because you got nothing that could specifically hard counter that one realistically, because it's just so durable and can deal so much damage and can easily be supported by anti-tank guns. So that does lead to some issues there against it. Doctrinally, while there has been change to the doctrines, and there's some that are slightly more used on, they still tend to just stick to like whatever has a crocodile, for example, like tank hunter or tank hunter special weapons that with all the tank hunter tank arms that get used, and maybe Vanguard. Otherwise, they'll just go for some Cromwells and maybe support with commanders and the land mantras. But beyond that, it's not really been any sort of huge changes in how the Brits play the game or sort of doctrines they go for. I mean, it's still very much, usual business, same procedures last year really. So there's not really been any big changes there as how to play the game, because in part they're not forced to respect, they're not forced to respond to it. I mean, again, for sort of a late game defensive faction that's supposed to react initially, they're not reacting, they're usually just pulling the punches and dictating where the fighting is happening. So they're very much still the aggressive early game faction with semi-bulletproof infantry, which is still a really bad idea. So the patch really failed to stop the Brits in any measurable manner, and you've sort of been playing them last month. I mean, again, you're just dealing with more infantry section spam this year so far. Moving on to the Axis, the Oberkommando has certainly seen some shifts. I mean, mechanized regiment, which used to be the the hot thing, has very much sort of fallen out of favour in favour of Battle Group Headquarters and the flak half track. The flak half track is sort of new big boss in the field, able to suppress, do a lot of damage. You can't have to be careful with it, but can certainly punch more. Sturmpani is also likely to see more popularity, in part due to, well, just their buffs, but also fire Sturm, of course, now being more useful, meaning more flamethrowers, and that also makes Sturmpanies a lot more useful. They're certainly also forced to caught on with some place for the MP40s, the flamethrowers. Not so much though for the Oberblitz, which I still feel like something they should consider using more of. Otherwise, Luftwaffe, Spec Ops, Scavenging is sort of the usual sort of old haunt there, but overall there's a lot more flak half tracks going on, a lot more Battle Group Headquarters. Mechanized regulars now increasingly just being used for the repair pioneers, or the occasional player then goes for Lux Puma, so you try and put your hit there. And they usually, if they go for that, they'll go for special operations to call in a Command Panther. Not all, but usually they will do that. So that is a little thing there. For late game, there's overall, at least I personally noted, less push for King Tigers. There's more Panthers, I mean, the Panthers have obviously got better, so there's obviously a lot more of that, but there's also been an increase in Panthers for the Oberkommando West, which is slightly interesting. And it's, kind of got made worse with the patch, but seemingly people still have faith in it, and if you can put it out fast enough, I mean, it's still reasonably good, but again, you have to sort of put it out as the first thing possible, and of course keep it reasonably well supported with infantry. Overall, Oberkommando players have not gotten better at using their Panthers, which is one of the issues. Finally, the Wehrmacht. For the Wehrmacht, I mean, not really a lot. I mean, the big change is basically Jaeger infantry. A lot more players are using that one, because obviously you get D33, but also get the Jaeger Command Squad, which is obviously just a more elite Grenadier Squad, which can sort of carry the weight more, deal more damage, can also help you replace losses. I mean, it's just pretty good, and it's quickly in many players, become sort of the core asset of the Wehrmacht, something sort of giving them the push there in the early game. Of course, also means in some ways they won't have Tigers there and other things, but the Jaeger Command Squad obviously has become very popular, and so become part of the strategy. No real builders that's largely the same, just get a bunch of Grenadiers and MD42, and then if you go for a lot of Grenadiers, they'll try and usually rush sort of Tier 3. Other cases they won't. Mobile defense has also seen a rise in popularity due to the increase in Greyhounds and thus light vehicles, so using that one for the Pumas to help keep things a bit off your back, buying more time, has also sort of risen in popularity. Ostruppen, slight increase in popularity. I mean, it does see some usage, but there's not really been any sort of significant changes there. And meanwhile, elite troops, Tiger Raiders and all that, even Lightning War slightly falling off, because I mean, technically elite troops got stormtroopers, but people want your Jaeger Command Squads, because you don't have to spend resources to upgrade them, and again they're 5-man, and people, unsurprisingly, really like 5-man squads. So that's one of the key takeaways there. People like 5-man squads. Overall though, otherwise you're going to see a lot of Panther Force and Stugs and Ostvins. I mean, that our players were really trying to make the Panther work for the Wehrmacht. And they can make it work, but only usually if they got really big lead on their opponent. That way they can make the Panther work, but in many cases I've just seen, you know, the Panther just ends up not working out for the one effect, directly leading to the loss for the Wehrmacht player, because the Panther just can't carry the weight it's somehow supposed to against the opponent. So in most cases though, players will stick to it safely, go for Panther Force, Stugs and Ostwinds. The Ostwind, despite the change, hasn't really seen any catching on. In fact, it might actually see less usage, because while they made sure the shots didn't get caught up in terrain, on the other hand with the AoE nerfs, it actually has in some ways less impact when it then actually hits, which sort of covers it down, because you have to remember you're still dealing with larger enemy teams in many cases. It also makes it hard to punish blobbing with it. So in some ways, the Ostwinds just fall less out of favour against the Panther 4, because the Panther 4, for example, in many cases will still perform better alongside, you know, other units. So there's a slight, you know, thing there actually where they sort of, you know, in an attempt to buff the Ostwind, they might actually, of course, this will drop off a bit then overall utilisation. Again, some players do rush it out there a bit, but overall the Wehrmacht just isn't the situation can actually get away with rushing out an Ostwind, so even that tends not to stick very well. There's been a slight increase in recent by of use of Panzer Grenadiers, I've noted from some Wehrmacht players, but overall most will still stick to Grenadiers because they're cheaper, and usually, I mean, you can sort of get more out of them because they don't have to get so close to the Panzer Grenadiers. In that regard, I think, you know, if you ask players like Fortune, one of the reasons why they don't go for the Panzer Grenadiers, because they do still feel like more of a risk for the 40 manpower, still 4 man. They have to get close in some cases, and of course, for some of the firepower, so wielding can be difficult, and then sort of get some good damage in with them. So while they can be good, it certainly feels like for some players they aren't quite worth the investment in the current sort of state of affairs. But you know, they can be good. So overall, while there's been some change to the Wehrmacht, overall, I mean, in many other ways, they've just reinforced the patterns of the last patch, because they didn't really increase the options of the Wehrmacht. In some cases, they've actually decreased the number of available options with the Wehrmacht. I mean, the overall sort of real new option has just basically made most people just hardcore into that, so they haven't actually got more options. They just, you know, now we're going for Jaeger Infantry solely for the Jaeger Command Squad in some cases. Like, they'll just go for that because he's just that good, and he's just that harder to kill, and that means, you know, most people are going to go for that because he feels like a safe choice, which I think also highlights one of the Wehrmacht's bigger issues. It's a high-risk faction, but with not enough yield, which means players will then aim for the generally safest choices, which tend to be 5-man squads, because, again, they're just harder to kill. So, again, I think the Jaeger Command Squad just sort of highlights, you know, in a way the issues of the Wehrmacht, and sort of, you know, indicates that something has to happen on the infantry side. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this little state of the balance. Whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts, I'm sort of trying to get some ideas here. I mean, again, it's sort of, there's been some shifts with some of the factions. I mean, overall, I'd say Orbital Commanderist and so it's probably sort of got the most out of it, whereas others just, you know, not really gone anywhere, and that applies to the 3 out of 5 factions. So, hopefully this video has been of use to you. If it has, subscribe, like, share, comment on. If you'd like me to do consider donating or pledging on Patreon. If this is in pro links, cheers, thank you for watching. Hope to see you all tomorrow for another episode. Bye.